Okay, so I want to start this deep dive with a bit of a confession, a little peek behind the curtain of my weekend.
Oh, this sounds good.
I spent the better part of my Saturday morning organizing a single drawer in my kitchen. And you know what I'm talking about, the junk drawer.
The drawer of shame. We all have one. It is a universal human experience. I think it might be a law of physics.
It is, but it wasn't just shame, it was more like an archaeological dig of my own bad decisions.
hmm
I found a charging cable for a phone I haven't owned since 2018. I found this weird gadget that's supposed to pit cherries. I don't think I've ever bought fresh cherries in my life.
Right, the aspirational cherry pitter for the person you were going to be.
Exactly. And enough rubber bands to, I don't know, hold a small car together.
hmm
And as I was doing this, just sorting through all these twist ties and old batteries, I realized I was stressed, like physically stressed out, over a drawer.
And that is the perfect entry point for what we're covering today. Because that feeling, that stress, it isn't just you being, a bit neurotic or having a bad
Well, it
Saturday.
felt pretty neurotic.
Well, maybe, but it's also biological, it's evolutionary. And it's really the centerpiece of the whole topic we're going to unpack.
That's right. That's what we're digging into. We are looking at a huge stack of research today. We've got papers on cognitive psychology, behavioral economics, even some environmental science, and it all centers on one word.
hmm
And that word carries a ton of baggage: minimalism.
And I think we need to clear the air on that word immediately, because when you say minimalism to the average person, what's the first image that pops into their head?
I see an empty, sterile white room, maybe a tech billionaire in a black turtleneck sitting on a single $5,000 chair that looks incredibly uncomfortable.
Exactly. It's the Apple Store aesthetic applied to a home. It's cold.
It's cold. I see deprivation. I see people who, frankly, hate fun. It's a lifestyle that feels very sterile and maybe just a little bit pretentious. It feels like a contest to see who can suffer the most effectively.
That is the cultural caricature.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's what you could call Instagram minimalism. But the research we've got in front of us today, it tells a completely different story, a much more human one.
Okay, so let's get into that.
If we look at the core thesis across all these sources, and we're talking about everything from dense psychological journals to economic analyses, minimalism isn't about the aesthetic of sparsity. It's not about how many forks you own or painting all your walls beige.
Thank God.
At its core, it is a tool for intentionality.
Okay, intentionality is a buzzword, though. We hear that in every self-help book. Live intentionally. Let's ground that. What does the literature actually say it means in this context?
In this context, intentionality is basically an editing process. So think of your life, your home, your calendar, your finances as a movie or a book. Minimalism is the editor that comes in. The sources argue that it's the intentional promotion of the things we most value, and, this is the key part, the removal of everything that distracts us from them.
So it's not about having less just for the sake of having less.
No, not at all. It's not about hitting some arbitrary number. It's about making room for more of what actually matters. More time, more energy, more money, more peace.
So it's a signal-to-noise ratio problem. My junk drawer is all noise, zero signal.
Precisely. And the noise in our modern lives is significantly, and I mean significantly, louder than most of us realize.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to try and debunk the stereotype that this is just for, I don't know, monks or rich people with no kids.
Yeah.
And we're going to look at the mechanics, the actual brain science of why owning less stuff might just be the most effective hack for mental clarity and, dare I say, financial freedom.
Yeah, and to do that, we're going to break this down into a few distinct pillars. First, the brain, how clutter physically affects us. Then, the resource exchange, time and money. And finally, the identity, the deep why behind what we own.
Let's start with the brain. Because like I said, when I was fighting with that junk drawer, I felt tired. And it wasn't just physical fatigue from standing there, it was a brain fog. It felt like my internal processor was just overheating.
That fog you're describing is a measurable physiological response. It's not in your head. Well, it is in your head, but it's real. We've got a study here from the Princeton University Neuroscience Institute that explains this perfectly. They looked specifically at the human visual cortex.
Okay, so what is happening in my brain when I look at a messy room versus a clean one?
So you have to understand that your eyes are not just passive cameras. They don't just record a scene like a video. They are active scanners for a survival machine, which is you.
Right, looking for threats, food, mates.
All of it. So when you walk into a room, your brain doesn't just see scenery. It identifies objects. And for every single object it identifies, it has to allocate a tiny slice of attention to process it.
Even if I'm not consciously looking at it, like even if it's just that pile of mail in the corner of my eye.
Especially in your periphery. The research calls this visual noise. A great way to think of it is to imagine your attention is like the RAM on your computer. Every object in your room is an open tab in your browser.
And we all know what happens when you have 50 tabs open. The computer slows to a crawl, the fan starts spinning like crazy, the battery drains twice as fast.
That is your brain on clutter. It's a concept called cognitive load. When your environment is visually complex, messy, cluttered, disorganized, your brain is constantly, and I mean constantly, multitasking at a subconscious level.
What's it doing?
It's scanning. What is that pile? Is it a threat? Is it a task I need to do? Do I need to move it? Is it important? It's a low-level, continuous triage.
So it's engaging with the objects even if I'm actively trying to ignore them. My brain is still asking, is that a bill I didn't pay, or is that the laundry I still need to fold?
Exactly. So those objects, they aren't inert. To your brain, they are silent to-do lists. They are screaming for your attention. And this constant scanning drains your neural resources. It literally depletes the energy you need for deep focus, for creativity, and even for emotional regulation.
Okay, that makes so much sense. So if I'm sitting on my couch trying to relax after a long day at work, but the room around me is a disaster, I'm basically biologically incapable of fully relaxing.
You are fighting an uphill battle against your own evolution. You can't fully switch off into that rest and digest state because your environment is constantly signaling unfinished business, and it gets worse. Let's talk about
The
cortisol.
stress hormone.
Right. There was a fascinating study, it's often cited in this field, that looked at 32 dual-income families. Researchers went into their homes and measured their cortisol levels throughout the day by taking saliva samples.
That's invasive.
A little, but they got incredible data, and they compared these cortisol levels against the density of household objects, specifically what they termed clutter.
And what did they find? A direct link.
A direct, statistically significant link between a high clutter density in the home and elevated cortisol spikes throughout the day. But here's the really interesting nuance.
Go on.
The data showed this effect was significantly more pronounced in the women of the households.
Wow. Okay, why? Is that biological or is it social?
The researchers suggest it's largely sociolinguistic and, cultural conditioning. For complex historical and social reasons, women have often been conditioned to view the home environment as their domain of responsibility.
Right, the keeper of the home.
Exactly. So for many women, a messy home isn't just messy to her brain. It often registers as a personal failure or a giant looming task list that's her job to fix. For the men in the study, the cortisol spike was lower, likely because they didn't feel that same level of acute personal responsibility for the state of the room. They could, for lack of a better term, tune it out more effectively.
That's heavy. So the clutter isn't just there, it's physically shouting at you. And for many women, it's shouting louder. It keeps you in a kind of low-grade fight-or-flight mode.
Low-grade fight or flight is the perfect clinical description. Your sympathetic nervous system is always just a little bit activated. You never fully hit that rest and digest state. You're chronically, slightly hyper-aroused.
This explains that feeling. You know when you finally clean off your whole desk, or you walk into a hotel room that is perfectly empty and clean? You get that weird sensation of being able to breathe deeper. I always thought that was just metaphorical.
It feels metaphorical, but it's biological. You have literally reduced the number of inputs your brain has to process. You've closed the tabs, you've freed up processing power for other things, like breathing.
But it's not just about the passive environment, is it? It's about what we have to do with all the stuff. We have to make choices about it constantly.
And this leads us directly to the next big concept from the research: decision fatigue. This comes from the work of social psychologist Roy Baumeister and others on a theory called ego depletion.
Right, I've heard of this. It's the idea that willpower isn't some fixed trait you're born with, but it's more like a fuel tank, a muscle that gets tired.
Exactly. Every time you exercise self-control or make a choice, any choice, big or small, you burn a little bit of glucose. You burn cognitive fuel.
And we make, what, I've heard crazy numbers, like thousands of choices a day.
The estimates vary wildly, but some put it in the tens of thousands. Most are subconscious, but many are not. Now, just picture the maximalist morning. The morning of someone who owns, too much stuff.
Okay, paint the picture.
You wake up, you open a closet that is just bursting at the seams. You have to choose between 15 different shirts, 10 pairs of pants.
And half of them don't fit right anymore. Or they need ironing, or they don't really match the shoes you want to wear.
Right. So you're not just choosing, you're processing dozens of variables.
Yeah.
Then you go to the kitchen, you have 20 breakfast options, you've got 5 different types of coffee makers. Then you open your phone, 50 unread emails, 12 app notifications, breaking news alerts.
It's an assault.
It is. And by 9:00 a.m., before you've even started your actual important work for the day, you have burned through a significant percentage of your daily decision-making fuel on completely trivial things.
This is the Steve Jobs turtleneck defense, isn't it? Or Barack Obama with his blue and gray suits.
It is, 100%. People often mock that. They think it was about building a personal brand or that they just didn't like fashion. But if you read their biographies, they are both explicit about it. They were optimizing for resource management. They were automating the trivial to save their brain power for the vital.
Obama said something like, I don't want to decide what to eat or wear because I have too many other decisions to make.
Exactly. Now, I can hear a listener thinking, okay, but I'm not running a country or launching the next iPhone. Does it really make that big of a difference for me?
Yeah, that's my question. If I'm just an accountant or a teacher, do I really need to preserve my decision-making energy that carefully?
Well, think about the end of your day. You know that feeling when you get home from work and your partner asks, what do you want for dinner? And you're just like, you want to scream because you cannot make one more choice.
The I don't care, just feed me phase, I know it well.
That is decision fatigue. That is your brain saying the tank is empty, no more. By minimizing the stuff in your life, fewer clothes, fewer kitchen gadgets, fewer apps on your phone, fewer social commitments, you are essentially reducing the friction in your day. You preserve that precious fuel.
And you can use it for things that actually matter, like being patient with your kids or having a real conversation with your partner instead of grunting.
Or having the creative energy left over to work on your hobby. It's a shift from a reactive state where you're constantly just managing your environment and your inventory to a proactive state where you're actually directing your energy toward your goals.
You stop being a warehouse manager for your own life.
You stop managing your inventory and you start living your life. That is the biological promise of minimalism. It's about getting your brain back.
Okay, so that's the brain. And frankly, it's terrifying and inspiring all at once. It makes perfect sense. Less visual noise, less cortisol, more mental bandwidth. But I want to move to the second pillar. The resource that stresses people out even more than a messy room.
Money.
Money. The financial argument for minimalism.
This one is probably the most objective of them all. It's really just pure math.
And there was a concept in the reading for this deep dive that just hit me like a ton of bricks. It was this idea of the two costs of ownership.
Yes, this is crucial. This is a fundamental mindset shift. We are trained by our consumer culture, by every ad we see, by the way stores are set up, to see only the first cost, the sticker price.
This blender is $49.99.
Right. And you look at your bank account, you check your credit card limit, and you think, I have $50, so I can afford this. But the minimalist perspective, which is backed by economic theory, says you need to look at the total cost of ownership. Some people call it the carrying cost.
What's included in that carrying cost? Because usually I just think about the sticker price and maybe the tax.
It's everything that happens after the initial purchase. So you buy the blender. First, you have to transport it home. Then you have to find a place to store it, which means you are paying for that square footage in your home, whether you rent or own.
Okay.
Then you have to clean it every time you use it. You have to maintain it. If it breaks, you have to spend time and money fixing it or researching a replacement. If it's something bigger like a car or a boat, you have to insure it. And eventually, you have to spend time and energy getting rid of it, disposing of it responsibly.
It's like that iceberg meme. The price tag is just a tiny little tip sticking out of the water.
Exactly. And underneath the surface is this massive hidden cost in both money and time. And let's not forget the temporal cost. One of our sources tried to quantify the number of hours the average American spends just managing their stuff.
Oh, no. I don't want to know this.
It's things like organizing the garage, decluttering the attic, looking for lost items, taking things for repair, shopping for replacements. Over a lifetime, it aggregates to thousands of hours. For some, it adds up to years.
That's horrifying. Years of my life spent just shuffling objects around.
It is.
Yeah.
So the trade-off isn't, I am denying myself this fancy blender. The real trade-off is, I am buying back my Saturday mornings for the rest of my life.
I like that framing. I'll take my Saturdays back, thank you. But let's talk about the bigger financial picture. Because it's not just about saving $50 on a single blender. It's about how our spending habits evolve over our lifetimes. It is a term for this, right? Lifestyle creep.
Lifestyle creep, or, as it's known in the academic literature, the Diderot effect.
The Diderot effect.
Yeah.
I love this story. It's so human.
It is. It's named after the 18th century French philosopher Denis Diderot. The story goes that he lived a pretty humble life for most of his years. He was relatively poor but content. But then his daughter was getting married, and he didn't have a dowry. The Empress of Russia, Catherine the Great, heard about this, and as a patron of his work, she bought his entire library for a huge sum of money.
So overnight, he's got cash.
He's flush with cash, so the first thing he does is he buys himself a beautiful, new scarlet robe. It was elegant, expensive, luxurious.
Sounds nice.
A little treat. It was nice. A little too nice. He puts on this magnificent robe, and he goes and sits in his study. And suddenly, he looks around, and his old, worn-out rug looks terrible next to this brand-new robe. It's tattered and cheap. So what does he do? He replaces the rug with a fancy new one from Damascus.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Then he sits down in his old chair, and the chair looks ragged and out of place next to the new rug and the scarlet robe. So he replaces the chair with a leather one, then the desk, then the art on the walls. One by one, every object in his study was upgraded to match the new robe until his entire study was transformed. And soon, he was in debt again, all because of one purchase.
We do this constantly. It's the gateway purchase. You buy the new phone, so you need the new watch to match and the new wireless headphones and the new case. Or you get a raise at work, so you buy the bigger house, which means you need more furniture to fill all the empty rooms.
That is lifestyle creep. Your income goes up, but your expenses go up right along with it to upgrade your status ecosystem. So your net wealth never actually increases. You're just running harder and harder on the hamster wheel just to stay in the same place financially.
And this leads to what the article's called financial anxiety, which is this bizarre phenomenon where even people with very high incomes feel perpetually broke and trapped because their overhead is just massive.
High overhead destroys your options.
Yeah.
It's a cage, a very comfortable cage, but a cage nonetheless. And this brings us to a really powerful concept that's popular in financial independence circles. They sometimes call it FU money, but for our purposes, let's call it optionality.
I like optionality. It sounds a bit more polite, but we all know what it really means.
It means the freedom to say no. If you adopt a minimalist lifestyle, you're living well below your means, you're not buying things to impress people you don't even like, you're keeping your overhead low. You accumulate savings, and those savings are not just numbers in a bank account. Savings are freedom units.
Explain that. How does money in the bank equal freedom, practically speaking?
Okay, so if you have 6 months or a year or more of your living expenses saved up because you're not buying crap you don't need, you suddenly have the power to walk away from a toxic boss. You have the power to take a year off to write a book. You have the power to take a risk on a new business idea. You have the power to leave a bad relationship because you aren't financially dependent on the other person.
So the stuff is actually an anchor. All those possessions are weighing you down.
It is a literal and metaphorical weight. Think about it. If you have a 3-car garage full of cars and boats and jet skis, and you have financing plans for all your designer furniture, and then you get a job offer in a new city, maybe it pays a little less, but it's your dream job, it fulfills you. You probably can't take it.
The logistics alone would be a nightmare.
The logistics and the cost of moving and maintaining all your stuff literally dictate your life choices.
That is a chilling thought, that my sofa is deciding my destiny, that my collection of kitchen appliances is the reason I can't chase my dream.
It happens to millions of people every day. Minimalism flips that script. It prioritizes mobility, flexibility, and agility over accumulation. The minimalist can pack 2 bags and go. They're light on their feet.
Okay, I am sold on the brain, and I am 100% sold on the money. But now we have to get into the really weird stuff, the deep psychology of why we buy all this stuff in the first place. Because I don't buy a cherry pitter because I'm a huge fan of logistics. I buy it because, well, why do I buy it?
And this brings us right to segment 3, identity. And we have to start by talking about a concept that is, frankly, a little painful. It's called aspirational clutter.
Oh, I feel personally attacked by this term already.
You should. We all should.
Yeah.
Aspirational clutter is the collection of items we buy, not for the person we actually are, but for the person we wish we were. The fantasy self.
This is the bread maker I bought in 2020. This is the Rosetta Stone software for a language I never started. This is the yoga mat that's still in its plastic wrapping.
It's the expensive hiking boots for the guy who hates bugs and actually just prefers a nice brunch on Sunday. It's the stack of smart literary fiction on the nightstand. Your Dostoevsky, your Proust for the person who actually, at the end of the day, just wants to read a fun spy thriller.
Why do we do this? It's so irrational. Why do we spend real money on these props for a life we aren't living?
Because, in a way, we're trying to purchase an identity. It's a shortcut. We think, if I buy the expensive guitar, then I am a musician. If I buy the fancy French cookware, then I am a chef. We confuse the act of acquiring the tools with the act of doing the practice. We think the object itself confers the status.
But the reality is, the guitar just sits there in the corner, gathering dust.
And here is the dark psychological twist. Every single time you walk past that dust-covered guitar in the corner, what does it signal to you? What is the emotion it triggers?
Guilt. 100% it's guilt.
Guilt. Failure. Inadequacy. It is a constant, low-level visual reminder that you are not the person you plan to be. It whispers to you, you didn't practice today. You didn't cook that fancy meal today. You failed again.
So keeping it around isn't neutral. It's actively negative. It's like a tiny little bully living in your house.
It's a negative feedback loop that slowly erodes your self-esteem. Now, the minimalist approach forces what the research calls a confrontation with the self. When you finally decide to get rid of the unread books or the unused exercise gear, you aren't giving up on your dreams. You are facing reality.
But that feels hard. It feels like admitting defeat.
It feels like defeat, but what it actually is self-acceptance. It's stripping away the costume. It's admitting, you know what? I am not a person who is ever going to play the guitar, and that is okay. When you stop pretending to be this fictional, perfect, hiking, bread-baking, guitar-playing person, you finally make space to figure out who you actually are.
And maybe who you actually are is a person who likes to walk in the park and eat delicious store-bought bread while listening to music someone else played on a guitar.
And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's about clearing the weeds of who you think you should be, so the real plants of who you are can finally get some sunlight. This leads to what psychologists call internal coherence.
Okay, what's that?
It's the deep psychological satisfaction that comes when your external environment, your home, your possessions, actually matches your internal values and your day-to-day reality.
You're living by design, not by default. I like that. But there is a huge, multi-trillion-dollar force fighting against this every single day.
Marketing, advertising, consumer culture.
Yeah, the entire industry is built on telling us that we are incomplete,
Yeah.
that we are not enough. You are unhappy, buy this serum. You are lonely, buy this car. You are bored, buy this phone.
Minimalism in this context is an act of rebellion. It's a quiet protest against that constant narrative of inadequacy. It's you reclaiming your autonomy. You are the one who gets to decide what adds value to your life rather than letting an algorithm or a billboard decide for you.
But let's be honest, we still need dopamine, right? We're human. Buying stuff feels good. We can't pretend it doesn't.
Oh, it absolutely feels good. For a moment. This is a classic psychological phenomenon known as the hedonic treadmill.
Break that down for us.
The hedonic treadmill is the observed tendency of humans to quickly return to a relatively stable level of happiness despite major positive or negative life events. In consumer terms, it works like this. You buy the new iPhone, you get a huge spike of dopamine, you feel amazing, you unbox it, you show it to your friends.
For about 3 days, maybe a week.
Right. And then it just becomes your phone. It gets scratches, fingerprints, the novelty wears off completely, the thrill evaporates. So to get that good feeling back, you have to buy something else. You are running on a treadmill, sweating, spending money, but your baseline level of long-term satisfaction isn't actually moving forward.
So if minimalists decide to step off that treadmill, where do they get their happiness? Because we can't just, stare at a blank wall and feel fulfilled.
They shift their focus. They move from pursuing extrinsic goals, things like stuff, status, appearance, to pursuing intrinsic goals, things like personal growth, connection, community. And the data is very, very clear on one specific swap that drives long-term well-being, prioritizing experiences over things.
We've all heard that phrase, buy experiences, not things.
Yeah.
But why does it work? Why is a vacation psychologically better than a big screen TV? The TV lasts longer. I can watch the TV for 10 years. The vacation is over in a week.
The TV lasts longer physically, but the happiness it provides degrades almost instantly. It becomes background noise in your house. Experiences work differently because of two key psychological mechanisms: memory and identity integration.
Explain that.
At the end of your life, you are the sum of your experiences. You are not the sum of your furniture. When you go on a trip or learn a new skill or go to a concert, it becomes a part of your story. It becomes woven into your personal narrative.
And even if it goes wrong, Especially if it goes wrong, it becomes a great story. Remember that time we got lost in Tokyo and missed the last train?
Exactly. That memory doesn't rust, it doesn't become obsolete, it doesn't go out of style. And interestingly, as we age, we have a psychological mechanism called rosy retrospection. We tend to edit our memories to look back more fondly on past experiences, smoothing over the bad parts. We don't do that with objects. No one looks back fondly at their 2014 toaster.
So experiences appreciate in value in our minds over time, while things depreciate.
That is a perfect summary.
And this must spill over into our relationships, too. The outline mentions something called comparison fatigue.
Oh, it's huge. The old phrase, keeping up with the Joneses. It's a status game. And the fundamental problem with the status game is that there is always, always someone with a bigger house, or a faster car, or a fancier boat.
It's an unwinnable game.
You can't win. So you have a choice. You can run yourself into the ground trying to win, or you can just opt out. If you decide, you know what, I don't care about the boat, I don't care about the designer labels, you remove a massive source of social anxiety from your life. You stop scanning your friends and neighbors to see if you are winning or losing.
That has to fundamentally change the dynamic of your friendships.
It allows for connection based on shared values and genuine affection, rather than shared consumption habits. And there's a practical side to it, too. If you aren't working 80 hours a week to pay for a boat you never have time to use, you actually have time to hang out with your friends.
Time. It always comes back to time. Time is the ultimate luxury.
It is, and there's a fascinating paradox here that one of the sources called the paradox of abundance.
What's that?
When you own fewer things, you tend to value each individual thing more. If you have 50 coffee mugs crammed into a cabinet, you don't really care about any of them. If one breaks, whatever, you've got 49 more.
Right.
But if you have just one or two favorite mugs, maybe one was a gift, maybe one was handcrafted that you use every single morning, you have a relationship with that object. You appreciate it. You take care of it.
It shifts your whole mindset from what am I missing, what's next,
Yeah.
to what is already here, what is already enough.
And enough is a very, very powerful place to be psychologically. It's the antidote to the hedonic treadmill. It breeds contentment.
Okay, I want to pivot for a second to the bigger picture. We've been very focused on the self, my brain, my wallet, my happiness. But there's a clear ethical layer to this that the research touches on.
The environmental impact and the peace of mind that comes with it.
Yeah. I mean, it feels good to clear your desk for your own sanity, but it also feels pretty good to know you aren't personally contributing as much to the giant landfill floating in the ocean.
This is all about conscious consumption. Most of us, I think, carry around a low-level cognitive dissonance. We know that single-use plastic is bad for the environment. We know that fast fashion is often built on exploitative labor practices, but we buy it anyway because it's cheap and it's convenient, and that creates an internal friction.
It's that guilt again, that little voice in your head.
Exactly. When you consciously align your consumption with your ethics, buying less overall, buying higher quality things that last, repairing things instead of replacing them, you resolve that friction. You feel a sense of integrity. You feel like your actions are matching your values.
So it's not about some grand gesture of saving the world single-handedly. It's more about achieving a personal peace of mind.
That's it, exactly. It's about knowing your personal footprint is something you can feel good about. It reduces one more source of background anxiety.
Okay, before we wrap this all up in a neat little bow, we need to pump the brakes. Because I can hear some of our listeners thinking, this sounds great in theory, but we need to talk about the nuances and the caveats. Because this whole idea can easily become a toxic new kind of perfectionism.
The holier-than-thou minimalism, the competitive suffering.
Right. The guy on the internet who brags, I only own 15 items, so I'm a more enlightened human being than you.
That is what we can call the rigidity risk. If minimalism becomes just a new math problem, if you are obsessively counting your socks or feeling like a failure because you own a blender, you have just traded one neurosis for another. You haven't gained freedom. You've just changed the design of the cage.
The goal is to feel liberated, not restrictive.
Exactly. If it causes you a panic attack to buy a book you really want to read, you've completely lost the plot. The entire point is to remove the non-essential, to focus on what is essential to you. If books are essential to your life and joy, then have 1,000 books. That can still be a form of minimalism if every single one of them adds value to your life.
And it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all solution, culturally speaking.
Absolutely not. This deep dive has a very Western individualistic perspective because that's where most of the research comes from. But one of our sources discussed minimalism in the context of Indonesia.
Okay, how is it different there?
In many communal cultures like Indonesia, hospitality is a central cultural value. You are expected to be ready to host family, friends, neighbors at a moment's notice. You need extra mattresses for guests. You need big cooking pots for community feasts. You need to have an abundance of things to share.
So if you lived in one of those empty white rooms in Jakarta, you wouldn't be seen as a cool minimalist. You'd be seen as a bad neighbor, a selfish person.
You would be socially isolated. So minimalism has to be adapted to your cultural and social context. It's not a rigid rule book from on high. It's a personal framework.
And now for the elephant in the room, privilege.
We must acknowledge this. Choosing to live with less is a profound luxury. It is a completely different universe from having less because of poverty.
I think about my grandmother. She saved everything. Little scraps of aluminum foil, rubber bands, old glass jars. Because she lived through the Great Depression. To her, throwing those things away was unthinkable because she didn't know she'd ever be able to afford to buy them again.
That's a perfect example. Decluttering, the act of getting rid of your excess, assumes you have the financial safety net to replace things if you make a mistake. If you get rid of a heavy winter coat and then there's a surprise blizzard, you know you can just go buy another one. If you are struggling to make ends meet, keeping those spare parts and old clothes isn't hoarding, it's a rational survival strategy.
So we should never judge people who have what we might perceive as cluttered homes. We have no idea what their story is.
Never. Minimalism is a powerful tool for those of us who are drowning in excess. It is not a moral prescription to be applied to the whole world.
Okay, so for the person listening right now who is feeling like they're drowning in that excess, where do they start? Without getting completely overwhelmed, without having a panic attack in the middle of their living room floor, surrounded by piles of stuff.
Rule number 1, do not start with the garage. That's the boss level. That's the final dungeon of the video game. You don't start there.
So you do start with the junk drawer.
You start with something small that gives you an immediate, satisfying win. A single drawer is perfect. Your wallet, the glove compartment of your car, or even easier, start digital.
Oh, digital clutter is a huge one.
It's massive and easy to tackle. Unsubscribe from 5 marketing email lists right now. Today. Delete the apps on your phone you haven't opened in a month. It provides the same little dopamine hit of accomplishment as cleaning a room, but it takes 10 minutes and costs nothing.
And then there's the habit change, the pause.
The mindful pause. This is the real game changer. Before you buy anything new, especially something that isn't essential, just wait. Create a rule for yourself. Wait 48 hours. Or put it in the online shopping cart and just walk away. Come back in 2 days.
And ask yourself some questions.
Yeah, ask. Am I buying this because I genuinely need it and it will add value to my life? Or am I buying this because I'm bored or sad or insecure or just saw a really good ad?
Am I buying another prop for my fantasy self?
That is the killer question. Is this for the real me or for the person I think I'm supposed to be?
Wow. We've covered a lot of ground here. From the visual cortex to the bank account to the soul. If we had to boil this entire deep dive down to one central idea, one word, what would it be?
Agency.
Agency. Explain that.
The modern world is constantly trying to colonize your attention and your wallet. Advertisers, social media algorithms, peer pressure, they all want a piece of you. They want to dictate your choices. Minimalism, at its heart, is simply the act of taking that territory back. It's designing your life to serve you rather than you spending your life serving your stuff.
That's a powerful place to end. But as always, we like to leave our listener with one final question, something to stare at the ceiling and think about tonight.
We've talked a lot about removing things, but the real powerful question is about what remains when you do.
So, here it is for you to think about. If you stripped away everything you own that is there just to impress other people, or to satisfy a version of yourself that doesn't exist anymore, what would be left?
And is that space that's left over empty and terrifying, or is it finally free?
Thanks for diving in with us.
See you next time.